Anna Cookson. BBC Radio Kent.
Now, though, we're turning back to a story you've been hearing in the news this morning, and it is about women too. Young mothers from the 50s, 60s and 70s who were made to give up their babies in forced adoptions, including at mother and baby homes here in Kent, have launched a petition calling for a more formal government apology. Campaigners from Movement for an Adoption Apology, including Kent County Councillor for Ramsgate, Constantine, think the government are dragging their heels over an apology, and they want more to be done to help those who suffered from losing their children. Our political reporter Michael Keohan actually went to the Trades Union Congress yesterday for the Women's Conference where the petition is being signed, and he's got more on this for us now. Michael, thank you for being here. First of all, it's really hard to hear about this, but do remind us about the forced adoption scandal.
It's something that hadn't particularly crossed my desk in any real great size or shape, but only then when you become aware of it, you realise the size and the depth of just how big this scandal actually was. It's estimated, Anna, that somewhere between 250,000 to possibly up to 500,000 mothers were affected. Now, the forced adoption scandal began in the 40s and continued right through to the late 70s. And it's where mums-to-be, often young mums in their teens with a baby out of wedlock, were taken to mother and baby homes. And they were coerced. They were put under pressure to sign paperwork to give their children up. To say, look, you're not a fit mother. You are not able to look after your baby. There are people out there that can do it better. And because of that social stigma at the time, and in an era now when we look at Instagram gender reveals and we look at baby showers, this feels like a lifetime ago. It feels more akin to Dickensian Britain than it does to something that people with lived memories are actually talking about. And mothers-to-be will be shamed, told they're not good enough. And then even during pregnancy, Anna, they will be denied medical support, not given the gas and air, not given the help they were needed with medical intervention and relief, because that was all part of the shame in shaming these parents, being told that's what you deserve. You had this baby out of wedlock at a young age. This is your fault. And mothers in some cases were only allowed a few days with their newborns. They were unable to name them. They couldn't grow close because they knew in just hours they would be taken from their arms and given to new parents. And in some cases, mothers today, including right here in Kent, they still do not know what happened to their children. And that's why they still want answers.
I know, it's an unimaginable situation, isn't it? It's awful. There was a recent report, wasn't there? What did that find?
The report said that the British government should apologise for what mothers went through. In the report, a detailed report, it laid bare that mothers went through psychological trauma. Equally, their children went through something similar through the adoption process. And it said that mothers suffered a severe violation of their human rights. And that's why the report says the government should say sorry.
What has the government said?
Effectively, I spoke to the departments yesterday that matter, equalities and women, and this is what they've come back with. They have responded to the report. This is the government's words. The adoption practices of this time caused suffering to many women and their children, and it had a profound impact on family lives of all of those involved. These practices have had a detrimental effect on the lives not only of the women and their children, but also on the fathers, the siblings, the extended family members, and their adoptive families too. We are sorry for those affected by historic adoption practices. We are sorry on behalf of society for what happened. But it's that final part there. We are sorry on behalf of society for what happened. Now, the mothers who went through this forced adoption scandal say, that is not enough. Don't apologise for society. Apologise for your role. Apologise in a more full, wholehearted way, like the Australians or the Welsh or the Scottish governments have done. And that's why mothers say, look, that was mealy-mouthed and not the apology the report says they were owed.
Yes, and there are mothers in Kent saying the same thing, including actually one of our own councillors.
Exactly right. They want a formal apology by the government. They want something, as we say, similar to what Australia did in 2013. And Constantine, she's a heavyweight when it comes to Labour councillors. She's been representing Ramsgate for many a year now. However, at the next election, Anna, Karen will be stepping down from being a councillor to focus on campaigning for this formal apology and working to support mothers who've been through this process. And Karen isn't somebody that's merely an observer. Karen's got skin in the game here. She went to one of these mother and baby homes when she was a young mother with her son Daniel, and I spoke to her yesterday. This is my conversation with Karen. I must warn you though from the outset, it's a difficult conversation to listen to.
I didn't understand myself that when I was 15 and became pregnant and I was sent away into a mother and baby home, and later I kind of explored what had happened to me because it had a very marked impact on me, but I somehow managed to keep my baby. What I didn't understand was that many, many, many women hadn't been able to keep their babies. And when I looked into it and started doing the research, it turns out that between the 1950s and 1970s, there's at least 215,000 women that were forced to surrender their babies to adoption. And some figures say that it's more likely that 500,000 women and their children were impacted. So you can see this is a really huge issue, and we're waiting for the British government to issue an apology, which was what the Joint Commission on Human Rights suggested the government do almost 2 years ago. Now, Wales have done it and Scotland have done it, but we're not seeing that action or commitment from the British government.
You mentioned you've got personal skin in the game here. What was your experience of being in one of these as you say, homes?
It was a very painful experience because I had the feeling from the minute I became pregnant that I wanted to keep my baby. Now, I know I was very young, but I wanted, I was pregnant and I already felt like I loved my child. Obviously didn't know what my child was. And I was shocked when I went to the back of the church at the end of a church service, and the priest pointed to the Catholic directory and just simply said, "We'll send the child there." And then before I knew it, I was collected in a car and taken away from Stoke-on-Trent to Birmingham, a place that I didn't know. And of course, in those days, in 1978, we didn't, we had phones, we didn't have the internet or anything like that. So one minute I was at school studying for my O-levels, and the next minute I was actually working in a laundry at St Paul's mother and baby home in Coles Hill, and my life sort of came to a full stop. Now, the assumption was that I'd gone there to give him up for adoption. It was a baby boy that I had, Daniel, and that was the assumption. And it felt to me, on reflection, almost every day I saw this person that was both my social worker and the priest, who constantly tried to force and pressurise me into signing the papers to say that I would give this baby up. And it got as far as him saying to me he'd found the ideal parents, he described them to me, he told me how these people could give my son a much better life, much better than I could ever give him. And of course I couldn't contact anybody to talk about how I was feeling. I couldn't ask if there was any possibility of a way to keep him. It just seemed to me to be completely hopeless. And somehow I did manage to keep him. And so when I'd heard about all of these hundreds of thousands of women that had been forced over that cliff and forced through that pain of surrendering their children, I felt the only thing I can do is to take action. And that's why I've been researching this topic.
When you look back now, how does your mind see that home back in Coles Hill? How does your mind process what happened to you?
I spent the whole of my adult life trying to figure out exactly what happened, why I got sent away, what happened to the other women, So I found that I had to share a bedroom with another girl, Helen, and she went into labour in the middle of the night. She was screaming and panicking because none of us got any preparation for childbirth, so she was completely shocked by what was happening to her body, and I was lying there thinking, oh my God, that's going to happen to me next, which it did. And I've always wondered, there was a girl there who had come back from Ireland. She'd surrendered her son for adoption, forced to surrender him, and she'd come back to try and fight for him. And I always wondered whether or not she got him back. So those women, they've haunted my memories, if you like. And I've had to kind of work quite hard to get the notes and the information from the home and try to get some of my information from social services, which has been really difficult to try and piece together what my actual history was. But right now I'm more interested in helping these other women to get this apology, because The Commission for Human Rights is saying it should be given, and the government is dragging its feet, and it needs to stop dragging its feet and get the job done and give this women the apology, because these women are of an age now. I'm 61. Many of them are older than me. Many of them now are too old to campaign. Many of them are passing away. And there are women in their 70s and 80s who still need support, they still need therapy, they need help with all sorts of issues, and the government isn't giving it to them, and it needs to. It's urgent and important.
When you give birth, it's supposed to be one of the biggest moments of pride in your life. It's supposed to be a happy moment that's celebrated. For you, it sounds like it was anything but.
So one of the things that happened to me when I went into hospital is I was shoved into a room in some corridor miles away from anybody, and I was left on a bed on my own for hours and hours and hours. And this is the truth. I was in pain, and I was told if pain got too much, I could ring the bell. Now, at 15, I didn't have the confidence to ring that bell, but eventually, racked by childbirth, I did press the bell. Nobody came. And eventually, a woman came in to help me to use the gas and air. And she showed me how to do it. And I noticed as she left, she was actually the cleaner. The cleaner came in to help me. And the thing about this issue is, and what I found from my research is, many women were punished during childbirth. They weren't given pain relief, they weren't prepared, they weren't consented, they were simply treated appallingly badly in almost all cases of women that I've now interviewed, because the childbirth was also part of the punishment and the shame for daring to get pregnant in the first place. So it was awful.
You mentioned Daniel at the start there, your son.
Yeah.
Was you scared to love him at the start in case you lost him?
No, it was it was actually the most wonderful, marvellous thing, and it makes me feel very sad for the women that were forced to surrender their babies, because I always said, whilst everybody was saying to me, you've ruined your life, I always had a determination that I hadn't ruined my life. And actually, I always said to people, having him was the making of me. It was absolutely the making of me. I developed skills and confidence, and that love that I had from him and gave to him was an amazing thing. And I could get quite upset, but I'm eternally grateful for the experience. But the thing to remember here is, most of these women were not that lucky. They had the polar opposite experience. I cannot imagine how they must feel decades and decades later, wondering what happened to their children, or trying to build bridges with the children as they found them as they've got much older.
And actually, next week we will hear from some of those mothers who are still looking for their children, nearly 50 years on. And one daughter who, after decades, did finally reconnect with her mum. That was Constantine then, the Kent County Councillor for Ramsgate, who, as you heard, nearly lost her baby in the forced adoption scandal. She was talking to our political reporter, Michael Keohan. And thank you so much to Denise, who's got in touch from Minster, Sheppey, this morning, saying, I was an only child. I had good parents, but when unmarried and pregnant, my mother insisted that I went to a mother and baby home in Tunbridge Wells. I was firm and I kept my baby. It was awful there, she says. 4 of us in a dorm. The staff were hard. One young woman was forced to give up her child and her life was hell. In her 50s, she died of alcohol-related illness. It's so tragic to hear that, Denise, and I'm so glad that you were firm and that you did manage to keep your baby. Thank you so much for letting us know, and we wish you all the love in the world. Jim's in Chatham, and he says, why couldn't these young girls' parents have stopped this happening? You'd imagine they could have done. I couldn't tell you the reasons why they didn't. Maybe in some cases they also felt powerless. As I say, we'll have more on this next week here on the Wake Up Call on BBC Radio Kent. And if you've also got a story that you'd like to share, please do. The number for WhatsApp is 08000 321 333, and you can message us like Denise has done.